Hello friends, welcome to the learning series on the great scientists and technologists of the world. Today we are going to learn about Isaac Newton, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 17th century. Kindly watch till the end to know the unknown areas of Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, a scientist, had thoughts and ideas far ahead of his time. He showed an interest in exploring everything. He discovered the laws of gravitation. An ray of light is made up of many colors. He also wrote a book called Principia, which is famous till now. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. Sir Isaac Newton was born on December 25, 1642, in a small town called Woolsthorpe in Lincolnshire, England. When he was very small, his family gathered around him to pray because the doctor had said that the little baby would die. Their prayers were answered. The little baby lived and grew up to be one of the greatest scientists the world has ever seen. He was born into a family of farmers. His father died 3 months before he was born. After a few years, his mother remarried a man who treated little Isaac very badly. In spite of being treated poorly by all of this, little Isaac showed signs of genius that would make him one of the most popular names in the whole world. As a child, Isaac showed astonishing creativity and an eagerness to explore almost anything. He also had a keen interest in religion. An interest that later on defined his very way of thinking. Although Isaac had a passion for learning, he showed only a little interest in school. In fact, his teachers referred to him as a quiet, inattentive boy who was always daydreaming. Whenever he had some spare time, Isaac was always reading books and inventing some small toy or another. He made carts, windmills, and various other small contraptions, including a flower-making machine that was run by a mouse. When he was 19 years old, Isaac Newton finished school and entered the University of Cambridge. To everyone's surprise, he opted for a law degree. It was no surprise that, within a short period of time, he lost interest in the lectures at the college. He hated the way all the professors just taught him things from the textbooks on great philosophers like Aristotle and Plato. They did not allow Isaac or any of the other students to experiment with things. Isaac once said, "Plato is my friend, Aristotle is my friend, but my best friend is truth." One day, while attending a book fair at Cambridge University, the young Isaac Newton happened to pick up a book on astrology. He was surprised to find that he could not understand what was written in the book, since it had a lot of mathematics in it. Isaac did not give up. He picked up books on mathematics, trigonometry, and geometry and soon became a master of the subject. Isaac received his graduation in 1665. At that time, a deadly disease called the plague attacked the town. Many people were killed. Although he was mildly affected, Isaac managed to survive but had to leave the university in order to recover from the deadly illness. He went back to his farm in Lincolnshire, and Isaac recovered quickly. He was soon bored with the quiet farm life and spent many hours wandering about the farm, thinking about the wonderful scientific and mathematical truths that he had learned at the university. He set up a small lab on the farm and began to conduct small experiments. One day, Isaac went for a walk on the farm. He had learned that the earth was constantly moving around. This made him wonder why he wasn't thrown off the surface of the earth. What made him stick to the surface of the earth? Passing by an apple tree, Isaac decided to sit down under its shade and rest for a while. As he pondered his thoughts, an apple came crashing down from the tree and fell on his head. Isaac shouted out in pain, picked up the apple, and held it up. Far away in the distant sky, just behind the apple, Isaac could see the moon. He realized that the apple fell because the earth, like a huge magnet, had drawn the apple to it. Newton realized that the earth's gravity pulled every object towards it. That was Newton's law of gravity. This law was just the beginning of things to come. Newton went on to prove that a ray of light was made up of many colors. He did this with a prism that split the white light into a colorful spectrum. He then went on to design a revolutionary reflecting telescope. Newton's various laws explained a wide range of things that most people did not understand: the unpredictable orbits of comets, the tides and their variations, and that the motion of the moon was disturbed by the gravity of the sun. Newton was a strong-willed man and once remarked, "If I waited for other people to make things for me, I would never get anything done." Other scientists were happy to propose theories and let others perform experiments. They asked Newton why he preferred to work on his own experiments, which were sometimes dangerous. Newton replied, "The mind is tired when not balanced by honest labor with the hands." In 1687, Newton published a book with all his inventions and findings. This book, called Principia, is still today recognized as the best scientific book ever written. This work made Newton an international leader in scientific research. In 1668, the University of Cambridge elected Newton as one of its lecturers. A few years later, Newton decided to resign from his post at the university. Since he was already a very popular figure, he was able to get elected to Parliament. He was later put in charge of the Royal Mint. During this time, he radically improved the country's poor coinage system. In 1705, Queen and knighted him. From then on, he was referred to as Sir Isaac Newton. He was the first scientist to be knighted. He was also the first person to be knighted for his mental capability, not his military capability. Newton was elected president of the Royal Society and grew to be a very rich, very happy old man. When he died in 1727, Isaac Newton, the farmer boy from Lincolnshire, was buried in Westminster Abbey, a famous burial plot that was reserved for a king. Today we are going to learn about James Watt, one of the famous and renowned scientists of 18th century. Please watch till the end to know about James Watt. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. It was a cold January day in 1736 and the little fishing village of Greenock, Scotland, was about to get a new member. Mr. Watt, treasurer and magistrate of Greenock, ran a successful ship-building and house-building business. His wife, Agnes, gave birth to a boy baby. They named him as James Watt. A baby who would forever change the way humans traveled. Due to health condition, regular school attendance was almost impossible for little Jamie. When he did attended school, he was rated as a weak student. This was very embarrassing for Jamie's parents because Jamie's grandfather was a very brilliant man who had founded a school of mathematics, but Jamie's mother did not give up on him. She was a very learned woman, so she kept little Jamie at home and taught him science, math, poetry and grammar. During the long days when little Jamie was ill, he was confined to his room. He would read any book he could lay his hands on, and when he was bored, he would play with his toys. But even then, little Jamie showed signs of the genius he was to become. He would take the toys given to him, take them apart, and out of the parts he would construct new toys. A few years later, Jamie's parents decided to send him to his grandparents' home in Glasgow. One evening, while his grandmother was busy knitting, Jamie noticed a kettle on the stove. The water inside the kettle was boiling. As the steam came out of the kettle, it pushed the lid open. Little Jamie was fascinated. He took the lid off the kettle and put it on again. Then he held a cup and a silver spoon over the steam, watching how it rose from the spout. That was the start of James Watt's fascination with the power of steam. As James Watt grew older, his mind grew stronger and stronger. At 15, he had read many books. He had also made numerous chemical experiments, repeating them again and again, until he was totally satisfied with their accuracy. One day he startled his friends with a small electrical machine that he had made from pieces of scrap. In 1753 his mother suddenly died of an illness. Jamie was shattered, but his father quickly took the place of Jamie's mother. He became Jamie's teacher and guide. Jamie's father began to teach him writing and arithmetic. One day he gave Jamie his own set of tools and took him to the workshop. Jamie was overjoyed. At his father's workshop he developed an interest in trying to make things work like clockwork. The James Watt soon revealed that he could do such wonderful things with a small set of tools. The workmen in the shop began calling him Jamie with a fortune at his fingertips. Jamie made the most complicated work seem so easy and soon became the pride of the shop. This made his father very happy. In his late teens James Watt went to London to learn to be a mathematical and philosophical instrument maker. When he returned to Glasgow, he got a job making instruments with Glasgow University. Since there were no instrument makers in Glasgow, Watt entered the service as a jack-of-all-trades, who called himself an optician and sold and mended spectacles, made fishing rods, etc. At the university, James Watt met many scientists and made a lot of very intellectual friends. The scientists were fascinated with this mechanic, who could discuss philosophy, geology, physical astronomy and the structure of the universe. They were amazed by the enthusiasm with which he would discuss the manufacturing process of a needle, as well as the fine points of classical literature. Since James Watt was known to fix anything, a colleague asked him to help repair an early steam engine that he had bought. This early model, known as a Newcomen engine, wasted a lot of steam and used up a lot of coal. As he worked on the engine, James Watt realized that if he could solve the problem of the loss of heat, he could develop a very efficient engine. In May 1765, after wrestling with the problem of wasted heat, James suddenly remembered the steam kettle in his grandmother's home. In excitement he shouted, "That's the solution. If I can condense the steam in a separate vessel, it would remove the need for heating and cooling, making the steam engine faster, safer, and more fuel efficient." With this new idea, James Watt met John Roebuck, the founder of the Cairn Works. John was a businessman who could spot a great idea. He at once urged James to make an engine. In 1768, James and John entered into a partnership to develop the new steam engine. In the following year James Watt took out the famous patent for a new invented method of lessening the consumption of steam and fuel in fire engines. Unfortunately, John Roebuck went bankrupt in 1772. This meant that James Watt had no more money to continue his experiments with the steam engine. To his luck, Matthew Boulton, the manufacturer of the Soho Works in Birmingham, bought out a share in Watt's patent. Boulton's financial support helped James make rapid progress with the engine. In 1775, James Watt and Matthew Boulton began a partnership that lasted 25 years. In 1776, two of the new Watt engines were installed. One in a Staffordshire mine and the other in the furnaces of John Wilkinson. Soon managers of copper and tin mines requested James Watt to install engines that would help them cut costs. For the next 5 years, until 1781, James Watt spent long periods in Cornwall, where he installed and supervised numerous engines. Matthew Boulton was a good businessman. In 1781, he foresaw a new market in the corn, malt, and cotton mill industries. He urged Watt to invent a rotary motion for the steam engine. James did this in 1781 with his so-called sun and planet gear, in which a shaft produced 2 revolutions for each cycle of the engine. This was 1782, and James Watt was at the height of his inventive powers. He patented this double-acting engine, in which the piston pushed as well as pulled. 4 years later he invented automatic engine speed control, and in 1790, he invented a pressure gauge. Together they virtually completed the Watt engine. Demands for his engine came quickly from paper mills, flour mills, cotton mills, iron mills, distilleries, canals, and waterworks. By 1790, Watt was a wealthy man, having received £76,000 in royalties on his patents in 11 years. Apart from his steam research, Watt was involved in many other projects. He invented the rev counter and a letter copying press, the earliest version of a photocopier, and he created the term horsepower. James Watt had now become a public figure. He and Boulton were elected Fellows of the Royal Society of London. From 1795 onwards, James Watt gradually withdrew from business. In 1808, he founded the Watt Prize in Glasgow University. When he was offered the Nobel title of a baron, but he declined it and gracefully glided into old age. On August 19, 1819, at the age 83, James Watt died in his home at Heathfield. In 1882, the British Association gave his name to the unit of electrical power. From then on, all recordings of electrical outputs were calculated in watts. A fitting reminder to a man who helped illuminate a new path in mankind's constant quest for perfection. Today we are going to learn about Galileo Galilei, one of the famous and renowned scientists of 16th century. Please watch till the end to learn about Galileo Galilei. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. On the 15th of February 1564, Galileo was born to Vincenzo Galilei as the first child. Vincenzo was a wool trader and a musician who lived in Pisa, Italy. He was pretty famous for his contributions to the theory and practice of music. Vincenzo moved his family to Florence in the early 1570s. This was the place where the Galilei family had lived for generations. It was here that little Galileo was sent to a Jesuit monastery. Vincenzo wanted little Galileo to study medicine. He did not want his son to be a musician as it was difficult to earn enough money. After studying at the Jesuit school for 4 years, Galileo shocked his father by telling him that he wanted to become a priest. Vincenzo knew that his son was gifted. He did not want him to become a priest. So, he hastily withdrew Galileo from the monastery and sent him to the University of Pisa to study medicine. At the University of Pisa, Galileo became fascinated with mathematics. Unfortunately, he was bored with all the other subjects and quite often told his professors that he hated their classes. He was frequently absent from class as he was out exploring some strange new mathematical theory. Once Galileo noticed a lamp swinging overhead. Curious to find out how long it took the lamp to swing back and forth, he used his pulse to time the large and small swings. Galileo discovered that the period of each swing was exactly the same. He at once came up with the pendulum law, which was eventually used to regulate clocks. This instantly made Galileo famous. Galileo's poor performance and rude behavior forced the university to inform Galileo's family that their son was in danger of being thrown out of the university. Galileo's father quickly worked out a compromise that allowed Galileo to be tutored full-time in mathematics by the mathematician of the Tuscan court. Even this did not help, and soon Galileo left the University of Pisa without a degree. He was a college dropout. With no money in his purse, Galileo realized that he had to somehow earn a living. He started tutoring students in mathematics. During this time, he successfully developed a balance that could mention how much the object being weighed is heavier than the same volume of water. Although Galileo was brilliant, he had offended too many people in the field. So he found it hard to fulfill his dream of becoming a professor of mathematics. Then suddenly Galileo got a chance to lecture at the Academy of Florence. The audience was totally impressed by Galileo and people started talking about him. Within a short time, Galileo received a 3-year appointment to the University of Pisa, the same university that had thrown him out without a degree. At the University of Pisa, Galileo began debating one of Aristotle's laws. The law stated that heavier objects fell faster than lighter objects. Since the law had been blindly accepted, Galileo decided to test it. Galileo climbed to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, carrying with him balls of varying size and weight. He threw all the balls off the top at the same time. To everyone's surprise, they all landed at the same time. Thus Galileo had proved that Aristotle was wrong. In those days, Aristotle was considered to be the father of science. So when Galileo had disproved Aristotle's theory, many people hated him. To make matters worse, Galileo continued to behave rudely to his colleagues. Not surprisingly, the University of Pisa decided not to renew Galileo's contract. Disappointed, Galileo moved on to the University of Padua. Once again, Galileo found himself in desperate need of money. His father had just died and Galileo had become the head of the family. He had many debts and also had to pay the dowry for one of his sisters. Galileo knew he could be thrown in prison for not repaying his debts. Galileo desperately decided to try and invent something that could bring him some money. In 1596 he invented a military compass that could be used to accurately aim cannonballs. This became a huge success. In 1597 he modified the compass so that it could be used in land surveying. Together, these inventions earned him a good amount of money. By 1609 Galileo was very famous. He had determined and proved that the distance fallen by a body is proportional to the square of the elapsed time, the law of falling bodies, and that the trajectory of a projectile is a parabola. Both these conclusions contradicted Aristotle's physics. In the spring of 1609 Galileo heard about the invention of a new instrument that could show distant things as though they were nearby. Galileo quickly visited the nearest spectacle maker's shop and bought up a lot of old glasses. By trial and error, Galileo quickly figured out the secret of this invention and made his own three-powered telescope. Instead of stopping, Galileo continued to improve the instrument and produced increasingly powerful telescopes. In August of that year, he presented an 8-powered telescope to the Venetian Senate. The Senate was so impressed that they rewarded him with a lifetime job and doubled his salary. Galileo was soon observing the planets with instruments that magnified up to 20 times. In December he drew the moon's phases as seen through the telescope, showing that the moon's surface was not smooth, as most people thought, but that it was rough and uneven. In January 1610 he discovered 4 moons revolving around Jupiter. These discoveries were earth-shaking, and Galileo quickly produced a little book he called the Sidereal Messenger. For his efforts Galileo was rewarded with an appointment as mathematician and philosopher of the Grand Duke of Tuscany. Throughout this time Galileo was working upon a secret theory. Unlike most of the people who believed that the sun revolved around the earth, he believed in the theory of the great astronomer Copernicus, that the earth revolved around the sun. Galileo's increasingly blatant acceptance of the theories of Copernicus began to cause trouble for him. In 1613 he wrote a letter to his student Benedetto Castelli comparing the Copernican theory with certain passages from the Bible. Several priests in Florence lodged complaints against Galileo in Rome. Galileo went to Rome to defend his good name. But he was warned by Cardinal Bellarmine not to hold or defend the Copernican theory. In 1623 Galileo published a book called The Assayer. This was a brilliant book on physical reality and an explanation of the new scientific method. To his luck, one of Galileo's friends, Cardinal Barberini, was chosen to be the new pope. He was named Pope Urban VIII. Galileo met the Pope and dedicated the book to him. The Pope gave Galileo permission to write a book about the theories of the universe. When the book, called Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, Ptolemaic and Copernican, appeared in Florence in 1632, people started calling Galileo a blasphemer, for he had questioned the validity of certain passages in the Bible. Galileo was summoned to Rome in 1633. He was pronounced guilty by the Pope and was condemned to life imprisonment. But luckily, the sentence was never carried out and Galileo was never put in a dungeon or tortured. He spent the rest of his life at a villa in the hills above Florence. Even though he was 70 years old at the time, Galileo kept working. He started writing a new book on the sciences of motion and strength of materials. When he suddenly became blind, he spent his time working with a young student, Vincenzo Viviani, who was with him when he died on January 8, 1642. Only in 1992 the Church formally acknowledged its error in condemning Galileo. A sad and long wait for the man who showed us the stars.
We're going to study about Alexander Graham Bell today, one of the most well-known and prominent scientists of the previous century. Please watch to the very end to learn about the lesser-known aspects of Graham Bell's personality. Now let's watch the video. On March 3, 1847, Alexander Graham Bell was born. The Bell family was famous in the Scottish city of Edinburgh. Their family members were known and respected for their learning and academic achievements. Graham Bell's grandfather was an eminent elocutionist. Melville Bell, Graham Bell's father, was recognized for developing the first international phonetic alphabet. The earliest memory of little Graham was of him sitting in a wheat field, trying to hear the wheat grow. Eliza Bell, Graham's mother, was nearly completely deaf. Graham gave indications that he could learn by careful observation of things. He found he could make the bones vibrate to his voice by placing his lips against his mother's forehead. Graham was primarily self-taught and family-trained, with a brief stint at a private school, 2 years at Edinburgh's Royal High School, and a few courses at Edinburgh University College. Graham's mother encouraged him to play the piano. Fascinated, Graham made the decision to attempt to create a device that could transmit the human voice using the same vibration. As he got older, Graham started assisting his father, who was teaching the deaf how to communicate using sign language. Graham had a wonderful life until his brother unexpectedly passed away. Graham was upset and his health became bad. Graham's mother made the decision to relocate the family to America after Graham's father began giving lectures there. The Bells were relocated to Ontario, Canada, in August 1870. The Graham's health quickly became better. Graham carried on with his research, this time on a device that would use vibrations to transfer sound. By chance, he got to know Thomas Watson, a young model maker and repair mechanic. Watson assisted Bell enthusiastically in his experiments. Graham would give lectures during the day and Watson would work in an electrical shop. They would get together and carry out experiments during the night. They started working on a machine that used mild electrical pulses to transmit sound vibrations. Graham finally started writing the phone specifications in September 1875. Graham submitted his specifications to the patent office so that his invention could be protected. The United States Patent Office awarded Graham Bell patent number 174,465 on March 10, 1876. On June 25, 1876, Graham presented his invention at an exhibition in Philadelphia, USA, marking the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence's singing. Despite arriving late, he was unable to secure a booth in the electrical sector and was instead placed in a distant corner of the educational exhibit. Graham said to the people, "This is my invention. With this, people will be able to talk to each other over wires." The people just laughed at him, so he asked his assistant Watson to go to the end of the hall. Then he picked up a mouthpiece connected to a wire and said, "Come here, Watson. I want to see you." The people gasped in amazement, for at the other end of the hall, Watson could hear Graham Bell's voice. Thus, the telephone was born. Graham Bell earned a lot of money by selling the concept of a telephone. This sudden windfall of money freed him from the worries of earning enough money to live. He was now able to dedicate his life to discovery and invention. Graham Bell started a company, the Bell Telephone Company. Graham Bell always considered himself to be a humanitarian first and an inventor next. He always ready to donate to institutions for the deaf, as his mother and wife happened to be deaf. To the very end of his life, he considered himself above all to be a teacher of the deaf. Graham Bell died in Baddeck, Nova Scotia, on the 2nd August 1922. At the time of his burial, all telephone service stopped for a minute throughout U.S., in simple respect for a life well lived. Alexander Graham Bell once summed up his approach to life and invention: "Leave the beaten track occasionally and dive into the woods. Every time you do so, you will be certain to find something that you have never seen before. Follow it up, explore around it, and believe you know it. You will have something worth thinking about to occupy your mind. All really big discoveries are the results of thinking differently. Thanks for spending time to learn about Graham Bell today. We will learn about many scientists and technologists of the world in this series planned.
Today we are going to learn about Louis Pasteur, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 19th century. Kindly watch till the end to know the unknown areas of Louis Pasteur. Scientist Louis Pasteur revolutionized the medical field in the 19th century. He was a firm believer in the transcendence of spiritual values above everything else. He found the method of pasteurization, the germ theory of disease, and a cure for rabies. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. In the little town of Dole, on the Jura mountain range in France, there lived a poor tanner named Jean Pasteur. It was a cold December in 1822, and Jean's wife had given birth to a baby boy. They named him Louis Pasteur. During his time in elementary school, Louis did not excel academically. Whenever he had the chance, he would rather fish and draw. Louis's father did not want him to become an artist, despite the fact that he was an excellent sketcher. His father wished for Louis to complete his studies and pursue a career as a professor. Louis started focusing on his education because he wanted to carry out his father's wishes. He started displaying a growing interest in chemistry and other scientific subjects at school. Seeing Louis's promise, the headmaster persuaded Louis's father to enroll his son in the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. This esteemed French university was established with the express purpose of preparing exceptional students for careers in science. Soon after, he received a call from the University of Strasbourg and was appointed as a chemistry professor. Louis fell in love with the rector's daughter while attending the University of Strasbourg. Following their May 29, 1849, marriage, they had 5 children. Louis was appointed dean of the University of Lille's new science building in 1854. It was here that he initiated a highly modern educational concept. Louis firmly believed that there should be a strong connection between theory and practice, between education and industry. He organized and supervised special practical courses and conducted many tours of the large factories with his students. Lille was an industrial town with a large number of distilleries and factories. While Louis was there at the university, an industrialist approached him with some doubts about the production of alcohol from grain and beet sugar. This fascinated Louis, and he began his studies on fermentation. At that time, most people believed that yeast cells were a byproduct of the fermentation process. There were a few biologists who believed that yeast was actually the cause of fermentation. Since they could not prove their theory, the other scientific experts ridiculed them. Louis decided to validate this theory. Louis spent the next several years figuring out which particular microbes were in charge of both normal and abnormal fermentation. Then he demonstrated how he could sterilize wine, beer, or milk by heating it to a relatively high temperature for a short period of time and killing any microbes that were there. This procedure became referred to as pasteurization. People thought that beetles, eels, maggots, and microbes could simply arise spontaneously from decaying matter. This was a subject of debate at the French Academy of Sciences. Louis thought it was evident that the yeast and other microorganisms arrived from the outside based on his research on fermentation. Through a series of clever tests, Louis demonstrated that the yeast originated from the grape skin. He let air taken from mountain tops and sea levels enter sterile jars holding fermentable solutions to demonstrate that the dust in the air was the source of contamination. Less dust occurs in the air, and fewer flasks exhibit development at higher altitudes. Through a series of studies on the contamination of wine by airborne yeast, Louis clearly proved that yeast and other diseases could be caused by the entry of foreign microorganisms. Although a lot of doctors and scientists believed that germs could travel in the air, most of them were unwilling to agree that deadly diseases such as cholera, smallpox, etc. could be caused in the same way. Louis made a well-known address before the Paris Academy of Medicine in an attempt to explain the issue to the scientific community. This water, this sponge, and this lint, which you use to wash or cover a wound, may deposit germs within the tissue that have the ability to multiply quickly, the speaker stated. Not only would I use spotless tools if I were an honorary surgeon, but I would also take the utmost care to wash my hands. Only lint, bandages, and sponges that have been exposed to temperatures between 1300 and 1500 degrees would I use. Louis's advice gradually gained traction in the medical world, and now antiseptic surgery and medicine are standard practice. Louis's discovery that most infectious diseases are caused by germs came to be known as the germ theory of disease. It was one of the most important discoveries in medical history. Louis's work became the foundation for the science of microbiology and a cornerstone of modern medicine. At that time, France's economy and sheep industry were being destroyed by anthrax, a deadly illness that affects cattle and sheep. Even though Robert Koch, a German scientist, had previously identified the anthrax bacillus in diseased sheep, he had not established the bacillus's causal relationship with anthrax. Louis employed straightforward experiments to establish beyond a shadow of a doubt that the anthrax bacillus was the only possible cause of the illness. His germ theory was thus solidly proven. Continuing his research, Louis discovered that weakened forms of a microbe could be used as an immunization against more virulent forms of the microbe. For the first time, he discovered that people could be vaccinated against a disease. The last and most famous of Louis's research was the development of a vaccine against rabies. Although very few people died of rabies, it was still a terrible disease that gripped the imagination of many people. People used to treat a rabies bite by burning the bite wound with a red-hot iron. Through his research, Louis found that the rabies agent was present in the dog's spinal cord and brain. After extracting the agent, he finally developed a vaccine for rabies. After initial testing, Louis vaccinated 40 dogs. Louis became famous in 1885 after it was reported that he had found a cure for rabies. But the next question was, will the vaccine work on human beings? On July 6, 1885, 9-year-old Joseph Meister and his mother went to Louis's laboratory. Little Joseph had been bitten so badly by a rabid dog that he could not walk. Hesitantly, Louis treated him with the anti-rabies vaccine. Little Joseph made a perfect recovery and remained in fine health. Following reports of Louis's successful treatment, victims of dog and wolf bites from all over the world poured into Louis's laboratory for treatment. Louis Pasteur became a hero and a legend. The Pasteur Institute, funded by public and governmental subscriptions, was built in Paris to treat victims of rabies. Later on, more Pasteur Institutes were built across the world. Rabies was Louis's last major research project. His health was failing, and a paralysis of his left side from a serious stroke he suffered when he was 46 years old made working in the laboratory increasingly difficult. Louis Pasteur died in 1895 after suffering from additional strokes. He was buried like a national hero by the French government. His funeral was attended by thousands of people. Although Louis Pasteur was a scientist who brought about a revolution in the 19th century medical world, he always believed that there were spiritual values that transcended everything. Today we are going to learn about Louis Braille, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 19th century. Kindly watch till the end to know the unknown areas of Louis Braille. Louis Braille was also a generous and caring person. He provided a new way for those who are blind or visually challenged to read and write. Louis had demonstrated that amazing things are possible if you have the drive. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. It was a beautiful January 4, 1809 morning. Monique and Simon Braille gave birth to their fourth child in the little village of Coupvray. He was given the name Louis Braille. Simon was a leather worker, who supplied the other villagers with harnesses and other leather goods. Monique was a homemaker who raised her kids to be honest and hardworking. He developed rapidly into a bright-eyed child who investigated everything. The small, curious Louis ventured inside his father's tool shed when he was 3 years old. His mother was preoccupied with cooking, and his father was not home. Despite being cautioned about entering the tool shed, tiny Louis couldn't help but follow his curiosity. He found an awl in the tool shed and started to play with it. The leather was punctured with an awl, a sharp instrument. Louis's hand slipped as he was playing with the awl, causing him to poke one of his eyes by accident. When she heard him crying, Louis's mother came rushing into the shed. At first, she thought that the injury was not very serious, but as the days passed, the wound became infected. Then, to everyone's shock, the infection spread to the other eye, and poor little Louis Braille became blind. The first few months after becoming blind were very hard for little Louis. Louis was keen to learn, but there weren't many schools that served blind students. Fortunately for him, there was a new priest in town. Father Jacques Palouis was his name. Father Jacques at once saw the potential in young Louis and began to teach him. As the days went by, Louis learned to adapt to his disability and to lead a normal life. He went to school with all his friends and did well in his studies. He was both intelligent and creative. Louis showed that he had no intention of letting his disability slow him down one bit. Then one day, Father Jacques asked Louis if he would like to go to the Royal Institution for Blind Youth. Louis didn't have to think twice. He packed his bags and went off to find himself a solid education. Louis asked his teacher if the special school for the blind had any books that blind people could read when he first arrived. The teacher led him to the library, where she showed him 14 books created especially for young readers who are blind. Large letters lifted off the page in these books allowed blind youngsters to reach them and read the alphabet. The books themselves were massive and heavy because of how big the fonts were. Louis started to read all 14 books in the library. It took him a long time to read a phrase, even though he could feel every letter. Frequently, by the time he finished a sentence, he had almost forgotten what the beginning of the sentence was. Louis was convinced that there has to be a better way to read for the blind. Louis was already a talented musician. He had learned to play the organ and the cello when he was younger, and at the institute, Louis learned to play the piano. He was so good that he began to play at churches all over Paris. It also happened to be a steady source of income for Louis. One day, while he was at the institute, Louis heard that Captain Barbier was coming over to show them a new reading method that was called night writing. Barbier shared with the students his invention called night writing, which consisted of a code of 12 raised dots and dashes that let soldiers share top-secret information on the battlefield without even having to speak. Louis took the code and tried it out. He discovered that it was far better than reading the enormous volumes with the enormously raised letters. However, the army code remained sluggish and laborious. On a page, the dashes used a lot of space. There could only be 1 or 2 phrases on each page. Louis was aware that there was a method by which he could make this alphabet better. Louis took all his time working with different versions of Barbier's code at his next holiday house. Although Louis disliked the elevated dashes, he thought the raised dots were a good idea. Finally, by the time he was 15, Louis had trimmed Barbier's 12 dots into 6, ironed out the system, and removed the dashes. He then published the first ever Braille book in 1829. Louis continued to work on his new code. In 1837, he added symbols for math and music. When Louis suggested that Barbier to make some changes to his code, Barbier refused to listen. He did not want to take suggestions from a blind boy. The teachers in the school were also skeptical, so they refused to introduce Louis Braille's code. The students had to study Braille on their own. Louis continued to promote his new system of reading for the blind. He called it Braille, but never tried to claim all the glory for himself. He always told everyone that Captain Barbier had first invented the system. Despite the fact that Barbier fought Louis's system and tried to make his own method the official medium of instruction, at the age of 20, Louis was appointed as a teacher at his own school. Many other schools throughout the world started using Braille as the official language of instruction, despite his own school's refusal to do so. Double-sided pages in Braille books saved up a lot of space. In order to aid the blind in navigating public areas, Louis also created Braille signs. Louis had contracted TB in his youth. As Louis Braille grew older, his tuberculosis worsened until, on June 6, 1952, 2 days after turning 43, he passed away. After his death, his remains were sent back to the place of his birth, and later they were sent to Paris to be interred in the Pantheon. It was only after his death that his school, the Royal Institute, adopted the Braille system. Louis Braille was a deeply modest man who performed many acts of kindness and charity. Besides giving the world of visually impaired people a new method to read and write, Louis proved that if you have the motivation, you can do incredible things. Today we are going to learn about Marie Curie, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 19th century. Kindly watch till the end to learn about Marie Curie. She is the first lady whose ashes are kept in the Paris Pantheon. A fitting tribute to a woman who dedicated her life to the advancement of science and its application to the welfare of all people. Marie Curie discovered polonium and radium in 1898. In 1903, she became the first woman to win the Nobel Prize Award. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. Mr. Sklodowska was a brilliant school teacher who lived in Warsaw, Poland. In spite of his brilliance, he was still a very poor man. On November 7, 1867, his wife gave birth to a little baby girl they called Marie. Marie went through general education like the rest of her family. But at an early age, she showed an uncanny ability to learn. Marie learned a lot from her brilliant father. And slowly, she developed into a brilliant young student herself. Marie's mother suffered from tuberculosis. When she was just 9 years old, her mother died. As she grew older, Marie developed a remarkable memory, and at the age of 16, she won a gold medal on completion of her secondary education at the Russian Lycée. As soon as she was old enough, Marie took up a job as a teacher to help her father financially. At the age of 18, she took up a job as a governess. From 1885 to 1889, she selflessly worked as a governess, sending her earnings to her older sister, Bronia, to finance her medical studies in Paris. She had agreed to do this on the understanding that Bronia would, in turn, help her get an education. When her own turn came to go to the Sorbonne in Paris, Marie hit the books with a ferocious determination. In 1891, Marie went to Paris and began to follow the lectures of Paul Appel, Gabriel Lippmann, and Edmond Baudy at the Sorbonne. Marie worked late into the night in her students' quarters. She virtually lived on bread, butter, and tea since she did not have a lot of money. Not surprisingly, she graduated first in her class in 1893, creating the first of her many records. She became the first woman to get the degree called License of Science and Physics. Marie stayed in Paris and continued to study. When she was not studying, she worked in the research laboratory of a famous scientist called Lippmann. In 1894, she was placed second in the License of Mathematical Sciences exam. It was in the spring of the following year that she met Pierre Curie. From then on, Marie's life blossomed personally and professionally. Pierre Curie was a brilliant young French physicist, and he became Marie's closest friend. They were married in July 1895 and eventually had 2 daughters, Irene and Eve. Their marriage marked the start of a partnership that would change the world itself. For the scientific world, 1898 was a turning point, thanks to Pierre and Marie Curie. In July, the Curies announced the discovery of a new radioactive element, polonium. a name that Marie coined after her motherland, Poland. In December, they announced their discovery of radium. Their next step was to isolate both elements. Since they were poorly equipped and desperately short on funds, they spent the next 3 years on their research. All the hard work paid off when, in 1903, Pierre and Marie Curie jointly won the Nobel Prize in Physics for their efforts. Marie Curie became the first woman to win the award. On May 13, 1906, she was appointed to the professorship that had been left vacant by her husband's death. Yet again, Marie Curie became the first woman to teach at the Sorbonne. In 1908, she became titular professor, and in 1910, her fundamental treatise on radioactivity was published. In 1911, she achieved the dream that she and her late husband had set out to find. She managed to isolate pure radium and was awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. In 1914, she saw the completion of the building of the laboratory at the Radium Institute at the University of Paris. Thanks to Marie Curie, the medical profession finally has a powerful weapon in the battle against cancer. Marie's radiation treatment soon became a common practice. And then the First World War broke out. This gave Marie Curie the ultimate challenge. After overcoming stiff resistance from the French military, Marie, assisted by her daughter Irene, spearheaded the use of X-rays in war-zone hospitals. Eventually, mobile radiological vans, nicknamed Petite Curies, were deployed along the Western Front. In the final year of the war, 20 Petite Curies and 200 radiological outposts took some 1,100,000 X-rays of wounded men. Marie Curie was now at the highest point of her fame. In 1921, accompanied by her 2 daughters, she made a triumphant journey to the United States. The President of the United States, Warren G. Harding, presented her with a gram of radium bought as the result of a collection among American women. Marie returned from America and started lecturing in Belgium, Brazil, Spain, and Czechoslovakia. She also had the satisfaction of seeing the Curie Foundation in Paris develop. She helped inaugurate the Warsaw Radium Institute in 1932. Her sister, Bronia, became the director of the institute. One of Marie Curie's outstanding achievements was to have understood the need to accumulate intense radioactive sources, not only for the treatment of illness but also to maintain an abundant supply for research in nuclear physics. In 1934, Marie Curie's daughter Irene and her husband Frédéric Joliot discovered artificial radioactivity. Marie Curie was never very healthy and suffered from lung problems. She often had to tear herself away from work to rest in the French countryside or at sanitariums in Switzerland. A few months after her daughter's discovery, in July 1934, Marie Curie died as a result of leukemia. To what degree she fatally exposed herself to radiation will never be known, but doctors agree that she died as a result of problems caused by the action of radiation. In 1995, Marie Curie created her final record. She became the first woman to have her ashes enshrined in the Pantheon in Paris. This is a fitting tribute to a woman who spent most of her life dedicated to science and its use for the well-being of all humankind. Today we are going to learn about Alfred Nobel, one of the famous and renowned scientists of last century. Kindly watch till the end to know the unknown areas of Alfred personality. Let's go into the video. It was the October 21, 1833, and Emmanuel Nobel was quite popular as an engineer and inventor who built bridges and building in Stockholm, Sweden. 6 years ago he had married Caroline Ahlsell, and now she had delivered their 4th son. They named him Alfred Nobel, and although they did not know it, their little son would someday chart the course of history itself. Little Alfred was prone to illness, but he enjoyed a close relationship with his mother. He showed a lively intellectual curiosity that was very different from other children of his age. Since his father's work involved explosives, Alfred soon became very interested in explosives and learned the fundamentals from his father. One day, something terrible happened. Alfred's father lost some valuable barges of building material during some construction work. This made Alfred's father bankrupt. So in 1873 Alfred's father left Stockholm to start a new career in Russia and Finland. To support the family, Alfred's mother started a grocery store, which provided a modest income. Luckily, Alfred's father was very successful in his new business in St. Petersburg, Russia. Alfred's father had started a mechanical workshop, which provided equipment for the Russian army. With the successful business, Alfred's father was able to reunite his whole family in St. Petersburg. In St. Petersburg, Alfred and his brothers were given first-class education by private teachers. Alfred was a brilliant student. By the age of 17 he was fluent in Swedish, Russian, French, English, and German. He was interested in English literature and poetry as well as in chemistry and physics. His father wanted Alfred to become an engineer and join his growing business. So he sent Alfred abroad for further training in chemical engineering. Alfred worked in the private laboratory of Professor T.J. Peluz, a famous chemist. Here Alfred chanced to meet a young Italian chemist called Ascanio Sobrero. Ascanio had recently invented nitroglycerin, a highly explosive liquid that was produced by mixing glycerin with sulfuric and nitric acid. At this point in time, nitroglycerin was considered too dangerous to be of any use. In 1852 Alfred's father asked him to come back to St. Petersburg since the family business was booming. When he got back home, Alfred requested his father to help him develop nitroglycerin. Together they performed experiments to try and make nitroglycerin a commercially and technically useful explosive. At this time the World War was ending and conditions changed. Once again Alfred's father and his brother Emil left St. Petersburg together and returned to Stockholm. In Stockholm, Alfred, his brother and his father began serious experiments to develop nitroglycerin. They conducted many tests but could not control nitroglycerin. Then one day tragedy struck and Alfred's brother Emil, along with several workers, was killed in one terrible explosion. This convinced authorities nitroglycerin was too dangerous. The government banned any further nitroglycerin experiments within the city. But Alfred didn't give up. He moved his experiment to an isolated barge anchored on Lake Mälaren outside the city. After several experiments he found that mixing nitroglycerin with silica would turn the liquid into a paste. This paste could be shaped into rods of a size and form suitable for insertion into drilling holes. In 1867, he patented his material under the name of dynamite. To detonate the dynamite rods, Alfred invented a blasting cap with a fuse attached. It so happened that the Alfred's invention of dynamite come at almost the same time as the introduction of the diamond drilling crown and the pneumatic drill. The market for dynamite grew rapidly. Alfred Nobel was very skillful entrepreneur and a businessman. He negotiated fantastic business deals and by 1856 his factory near Hamburg, Germany, was exporting dynamite to countries in Europe, America and Australia. In the years followed, Alfred founded factories and laboratories in more than 20 countries. When he was not traveling or negotiating business deals, Alfred continued to work. He came up with many chemical inventions, including such materials as synthetic rubber and leather, artificial silk, etc. When he was 43 years old, he felt like an old man. He finally admitted that he needed someone to help him, so he advertised. He received many applications, but the most qualified applicant turned out to be an Austrian countess called Bertha Kinsky. Countess Bertha worked for Alfred for just 2 months, and then she returned to Austria to marry Count Arthur von Suttner. Alfred Nobel was rich and powerful man. He had 355 patents to his name and a worldwide business empire consisting of more than 90 factories. At the age of 63, his hectic style caught up with him and he died of a cerebral hemorrhage at his villa in San Remo, Italy, in 1896. Alfred Nobel's will had been deposited in a bank in Stockholm. When it was opened, it contained a great surprise for his family, friends, and the world. In the will Alfred Nobel wrote, "The whole of remaining realizable estate shall be dealt with in the following way. the capital shall be invested by my executors in safe securities and shall constitute a fund, the interest of which shall be annually distributed in the form of prizes to those who, during the preceding year, shall have conferred the greatest benefit on mankind. Alfred Nobel had started the Nobel Foundation. A foundation that would handsomely reward those who dedicated their lives to the quest for peace, scientific discovery, literature, etc. The Nobel Prize would become one of the world's most highly regarded international awards. Alfred Nobel's greatness lay in his ability to combine the clever mind of a scientist and inventor with the forward-looking dynamism of an industrialist and a deep love for humanity. The Nobel Prize seemed to be his way of fulfilling deep desire to contribute to the betterment of mankind. Thanks for spending time to learn about Alfred Nobel today. We will learn about many scientists and technologists of the world in this series planned. Please let us know your favorite personality to learn about in the comments section below. Have a nice day. Bye for now. Please like, share and subscribe.